a manual of, there were physiognomy manuals that show people's faces, and you could look at someone's face and assess how intelligent they are and what their future would be. And as is suitable for someone who's interested in physiognomy, he must have had a really great face, the story goes, because when he met his father-in-law, his future father-in-law, his father-in-law looks at him and says, "It doesn't matter that you have no money. I can tell from your face. You will be great," right? And that's one of the signs, the omens that this guy is going to go on to become the founder of the Han Dynasty. So we're looking at the tombs of his younger brother, and then his descendants, who are all buried in that place I showed you on the map. And I say the two tombs are very close to imperial tombs. The only tombs that would have been even richer would have been the Han imperial tombs. But I sense that you are a crowd with a lot of China experience. You will know this, that there's only one imperial tomb that's ever been excavated, and that's the main tomb of the Wanli Emperor outside of Beijing. So when you go to Beijing and you go to the main tombs, you are seeing the Wanli Emperor's tomb. I absolutely love this book. It's one of the best titles I've ever seen, The Dead Suffered Too. And what that means is that the excavation of the tomb was so badly botched that the dead suffered too. So one of the things that happens to the dead in this tomb, the Wanli Emperor's tomb, is that they're struggled against during the Cultural Revolution. And some of the contents of the tomb are burnt. So basically, but I was going to say, the reason no imperial tomb has been excavated since this excavation, which took place in the 50s, is that so much of the original textiles were lost. And so all of the archaeologists, there's like a national meeting of archaeologists every year in China, and they always say, one of my friends was telling me this, every year they bring a motion to the archaeologists and say, can we excavate imperial tombs? Like, should we cancel this regulation and allow archaeologists to excavate imperial tombs? And every year all the archaeologists say no. Because archaeology is destruction. You open up a tomb, and if you don't have the technology to preserve everything in the tomb, it's gone. So I recommend The Dead Suffered Too. It's for sale on Amazon for, I think, $4. I was looking for a picture of the book cover. So when you go into the exhibit, you'll see a lot of jade, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight is jade. And the first couple of slides of the jade that you'll see in the exhibit are from different tombs. Most of the material I'm talking about are from one particular tomb, which is called the Shizishan tomb, the Lion Hill tomb. So, but this is from a different tomb, and it's you can see a face mask that was placed on the face of the deceased. And we don't have texts that tell us this, but we all assume that you put jade on the deceased, the eyes and the nose, because you want the skin of the deceased, like jade, never to perish. It's the same logic when you put on a gold mask in Europe. I mean, there's people in different places use different things, and the Chinese have used jade for this purpose. This is a pillow. These are different shots of the pillow. This is in the exhibit. The workmanship is very beautiful. Well, again, this is a pillow ornament. Maybe someone in question and answer will ask me about this, but I remain skeptical that living people use these very hard pillows. I have asked archaeologists, and they say, well, all of the evidence is for dead people. So we don't know that the living use these hard pillows. Maybe some of you have some piece of information that will make me rethink my position. This is some jade armor that is also, you can see individual armor plates. This is on display. And then the next couple of things I'm going to show you are from this tomb, where really the most beautiful things come from this tomb because it was in much better shape than the other 9. There's this jade coffin, this is a reconstruction, but it's just a splendid object. It's not in the exhibit. I simply haven't seen something like that big made out of jade. This, of course, is the jewel in the crown of the exhibit. So there are 4,248 pieces of jade and 1.5 kilograms of gold thread that were found. And what I just said about the logic of jade, that it's supposed to protect whatever it's on, something that puzzles me a lot about this jade suit is that there's actually some gaps around his legs. Michael, very kindly, Michael Buning sent me this slide of just so you could see the suit when it's taken apart. Now, I'm going to get it straight. That's it. Right, so the legs are connected here to the torso, but there are some gaps. When I came to the exhibit, I wanted to take a picture so I could show you the gaps. I thought they were very interesting, but the guard came out and told me not to take a picture. Then I asked Michael if he could take a picture, and he said no, he couldn't take a picture either. So they're very strict about this. So that's good. You're all here. You can go see the suit and see the gap. And there's also, you can see, I don't know if you can see this, but here, there's a hole in the top of the head. And that's interesting too, because that may be, I think the logic is that the soul, in the Han Dynasty, there were many conflicting ideas about the soul, but maybe the main idea is that everybody has two souls, and so one of them stayed in the body in the grave, and the other one was supposed to go maybe to the realm of the immortals or go somewhere else. So maybe that hole allows the soul to leave. It's interesting because it also allows the top of the head to decay. Right, so things don't always make sense, right? Cultural practices. I was interested in this because this is the same item. So you can see it's it's two different items from that are a scabbard is a dagger, and so this is like a clip that goes on your belt, and then the scabbard can hang on it, sort of like a carrier for your calculator in the old days, right? That's the metal carrying it there. But what I liked was this top piece is interesting because they've allowed the jade to stay. They've worked with the natural jade. This is right. Totally, they've worked the jade, and they don't care about what's green and what's white, right? They just have their design, and they've imposed it on the jade. Here, they're working with the design, and that interests me because that's a key tradition in jade working, is to respect the colors in the jade. The most famous examples are from the Taipei Palace Museum. I think many of you will have seen these. This is a piece of jade that looks like pork belly, and if you go to the Taipei Palace Museum, is the sound still too loud? In the gift shop, you can buy like a mouse pad that has this piece. It's like the most famous thing in the Palace Museum. And they also have this piece of lettuce. But in both of these, cabbage. In both of these, the carvers have worked with the original coloring, right? That's part of the art, is capturing the quality, the coloring of the original jade, and then and making it into a likeness of a piece of cabbage or a piece of, I think it's roast pork that they say. Oh, I remember I was on the web having fun with this. There's a recipe it's called Sudong Hua's pork, and Chinese people decided exactly what kind of pork this should be, which just culturally makes a lot of sense, right? That you couldn't just have to be a piece of pork, you have to know exactly what recipe it is. Okay, where does all this jade come from? One of the great things about this exhibit is that they scientifically tested the jade that they found in this tomb and have determined that it came from Khotan. And I've just given you 3 spellings of this place. They're all the same place. This is the Chinese name for it. And I can't explain to you in English, and so it's spelled KH, but sometimes you'll see it like this with just an H. And I think maybe in Uyghur it's Khotan instead of Khotan. This is the source of really all the jade that we know about in traditional China. There were some other sources. You can see on this map here that there's a source around Burma, right? But that source is only discovered in the 18th century. So historically, all the jade is coming from Khotan. And I went to Khotan quite a while ago now, about 15 years ago. Sorry, I forgot the slide. The earliest example we know about of this Khotan jade coming into central China is there were 500 pieces of jade that were found in a tomb dating to 1200 BC, the Han Dynasty tombs, and it's in central China. So from very early on, people are sourcing the Khotan jade. We know they're sourcing it in boulders. There are boulders in Khotan, and I have a couple of pictures of Khotan. I was talking to my husband saying, how come we didn't have any pictures of the river? What I need is a picture of the rivers. There are 2 big rivers in Khotan, and a giant boulder of jade. That's what I need a picture of. And he said, well, because when we were there, you have no idea that you are in the center of the jade production center of the world, of the Chinese world. You have no idea. These are a couple of shots of Khotan. This is to try to entice you to want to go to Khotan. There are some graves. This is a site that is called Shampula. It's about 4th century BC. And I was going to say, it's total chaos. So this is when we went. It's been looted, and there's things are on the surface of the ground. Our driver very nicely said he would. This is the sort of Hamlet in Khotan picture. The driver, I said, at first I thought, oh, I'll hold it, and then Jim pointed out, quite wisely, my husband pointed out that it's illegal to rob graves, so it wasn't a good idea to have me holding the skull. So the driver very nicely held that for us. So that's like, I'm sorry I don't have a picture of the rivers in Khotan with the jade boulders. That's my bad, as my kids would say. This is Khotan too. One of the reason that site survives is, even in the terrible shape that it does, is that it's adjacent to a graveyard. This is a Muslim grave. Khotan is a Muslim, it's a Uyghur majority area. It's about 98% Uyghur, and it's also, and the Uyghurs are all Muslim, so it's a Muslim majority area, and these are traditional Uyghur and Muslim tombs. This is a close-up, and this is basically the skin of a sheep that is hanging there, and then there's some flags, and then also some Arabic script, probably inscriptions from the Quran. All right, back to where I said. So I was going to say that's Khotan. All the jade that you see in the exhibit has been tested, and they know for sure it came from Khotan. And usually, I've been at so many things where people look at a piece of jade and say, "Oh, it's probably from Khotan," because we all think all the jade comes from Khotan. But here it's been scientifically tested, and they've established for sure it comes from Khotan. So I was so happy to learn that. It's so nice to have something you just thought turn out to be true. Right? That for a scholar, that's really quite wonderful. Okay, so this is in the exhibit. This is really unusual. It's the only thing like it in the exhibit. It's a gold belt buckle, and you can see it's about 5 inches long. And this is the art of the Xiongnu. They're a tribal people in modern-day Mongolia, and basically all of the art of the steppes always shows one animal, one predator killing another. That's the basic principle of this. So here you can see we've got, this is the predator here killing, right? He's got like a horse-like predator. He's got his teeth around the victim here, who maybe, I don't know, the victim has like a wing. I'm not sure. These are imaginary animals, composite animals. And because it's so characteristically Xiongnu art, I was going to say, we know where it's from. Let me just show you. So this is, it's from Mongolia. So, and in terms of the path it took to get to the Suzhou, to the Chu tombs, it would have gone to the capital, probably as a gift given to the Han emperors. There are periods where the Xiongnu are fighting with the Han Dynasty, and there are also periods where they're at peace with the Han Dynasty. It was, and we know it was given as gifts. It's interesting because on the side, there's writing here that gives us the weight of each piece. The pieces, their weight varies a tiny little bit. So it was given as a gift by the Xiongnu ruler, and he gives it to the Han emperor, and then it's put into the storeroom of the Han emperor, and then before they put it in the storeroom, of course, it's a bureaucracy, they have to weigh. They have to make sure they know exactly how much it weighs. So in terms of the things in the tomb and where they came from, we have everything in the jade is from the far northwest in China, and then the gold is from what's modern day Mongolia. The last thing I want to talk about in the tomb is basically this goblet, because it's so unusual. And basically, if you think about Chinese cups, I mean, even today, if you think about going around China or going to Chinese restaurants and what kinds of cups people give you, they never have a stem, right? It's always like this. It's always a flat cup, often with a, with a lid. Like this. This is the lid of this cup. These are both, everything's about 4 inches high. These are on display together in the show. And so the question is, where did this shape come from? It's jade, so it was probably made, I think it was probably made in the capital. Anything, and Chinese art historians tend to say, anything that's really beautiful was made in the capital. I mean, that's just the prejudice, again, about the quality of production in the, outside of the capital. But in terms of where the shape comes from, people are pretty sure it comes from outside of China. And so the one very real possibility is from Rome. And this is a goblet, a glass goblet, that's actually on display right now at Yale, because we've got a show called Drink That You May Live till November 12th. So New Haven is close. You can get on, and the Yale Art Gallery is free. It's not so far away. And this is interesting in the show, because this is from Egypt, and it's made out of fans. And so the show is showing you that the idea for the goblet travels from Egypt to ancient Rome. So basically, I love this idea that people are sitting around drinking things out of different containers, and they look at this shape and say, oh, that is so cool. I need to have one of those, right? And I'm going to make it in whatever I can make it in. So the jade goblet is, oh, sorry, I was going to say, so the jade goblet is probably a copy of a lacquer goblet. So that, because a lot of the containers that people were drinking out of in the Han Dynasty are made out of lacquer. So, but anyway, with this shape comes into China from outside. And that's the point of this question, which is, oh, is this evidence of contact with Rome? Because we would associate this shape with Central Asia or beyond Central Asia. Rome. My PowerPoint skills aren't fantastic, so I do want to indicate that there's another possibility for contact with Rome, which is the maritime route, like all the way around and then around India and then up through Mesopotamia. But, and so now I want to leave the exhibit behind and talk a little bit about Silk Roads. And I love this map because it shows all of the different Silk Roads. And the one that I have worked on the most and that people always know about is the route through the desert. So, and this is the Taklamakan Desert. There's Khotan, right? So it's right on the edge of the Taklamakan. And so one route runs east-west all the way from the Chinese capital to, we could say, Syria or Constantinople. This is the route that was in use under the Mongols in the 13 and 1400s. Sorry, the 1200s and the 1300s, 13th and 14th century. Marco Polo, weirdly, if we believe him, I don't believe him, he says he traveled on the southern Silk Road. Doesn't really make sense. He should be on this road, but he does tell us a lot about this. And then, of course, there's the maritime Silk Road. The person who creates the word, the Silk Road, he creates the word in 1877. He makes an atlas, and he was a marketing genius. I've been on so many panels where we talk about the inaccuracies of the Silk Road and why it's the wrong term for what we should really call overland Central Asian exchange. And you know, if my book was called A New History of Overland Central Asian Exchange, you know, maybe my husband would have bought it. So von Richthofen was a genius at marketing, and this is his map that he makes in that atlas in 1877, and then I've just highlighted the route that he draws. He was charged with designing a railway that would connect Germany with China, and I think it definitely influences him and makes the road linear, right? He's not drawing that the map I showed you with many alternate routes. He's thinking about a single line. And his idea of the Silk Road Exchange is Roman coins for Chinese silk. And he really gets that idea. He's got a very good classical education, and there are sources in Latin that bemoan, by Pliny the Elder, bemoan the amount of coins that are leaving Rome and being wasted on silk. And what drives Pliny crazy is that the Romans are wasting all their money on silk, and the silk is transparent. What's the why? And women are wearing this, but why buy cloth that's transparent? Right? It should be transparent. If you're going to spend money on something, it should not be transparent. So, but there's a lot of problems with this. As I said, this idea of the Roman coins for Chinese silk. The earliest Roman coins that are found in China are very late in the 500s. So long after the time that Pliny is writing in the 1st century. These are the coins that we actually find many more of. These are silver coins, Sasanian silver coins, and we know this. I mean, this is each of the Sasanian emperors. This is the emperors of Iran. Each of them has a distinctive crown. So people who work on these coins know which crown. So this is Khusrau II has this crown. And then on the back of the Sasanian coins is a Zoroastrian fire altar. And there are 2 priests on each. Those are the eyes of the face of one of the priests, and those are the face of the other one. Whoops, that can happen. This is the fire in the middle. So there's a lot more silver coins in China than there are gold coins. So there's much more evidence of trade with Iran than there is trade with Rome. Just to orient you in terms of dates, that the tombs that we're looking at in the show are, as I said, 155 BC, or maybe 154. In terms of the start of the Silk Road, some people would start the Silk Road, the starting date of the Silk Road would be 1200 BC because of the Anyang tombs, that piece of jade I showed you, the Shang kings who brought in the jade from Khotan. But most people would start with this man, Zhang Qian, who was an envoy sent by the Han Emperor into Central Asia. And so that's a little bit after, about 50 years after this tomb that we've been looking at, and after the jade goblet that looks like it might have come from Rome. I was going to say Zhang Qian, so he has a very tough time, to make a long story short. He's kidnapped, he's held against his will, he escapes, and when he finally gets home, after about 10 years, he goes to see the emperor, and he says, oh, when I was in Afghanistan, I saw that there were Chinese goods. I saw these pieces of bamboo and cloth, both from Sichuan, that were for sale in the market. And I, Zhang Qian, asked the merchants in the market, how did you get these? And they said, our merchants go and buy them in northern India. So this is very nice textual evidence that Chinese goods are getting out of China, even though the Chinese government doesn't know anything about it, right? It's, I mean, a very, I would say, familiar story. The other story that people often talk about with contacts between China and Rome is this entry that's from a different history of the Han Dynasty. And it says in 166 AD, a merchant, well, an envoy came to the Han emperor, and he said he was from a place called Daqin. And there's a big debate among scholars about what Daqin is. Maybe it refers to Rome, but maybe it doesn't. I personally think it refers to a kind of utopian state on the edge of the known world. But this guy comes and he says he's from Daqin, and then he brings, look at the presents that he brings, the offerings that he gives to the emperor: elephant tusks, rhinoceros horn, and turtle shell. And this was the very first time there was direct contact between the Han and the Daqin kingdom. But there was a problem, that these gifts were not precious or rare, and it raises doubts that the earlier accounts were exaggerated. So that's one issue that the historian notes, who's telling us this a couple centuries later, tells us about this gift. To me, the much bigger problem is people in Rome don't have elephants and rhinoceros horn. So it's like, so this supports my view that Qin is not Rome. But if this is not contact between Rome and China, when can we say there's some kind of contact between Rome and China? To answer that question, we need to go back to Khotan, but actually we're going to look at a place that's very close to Khotan. I think it's almost impossible for all of you to see, called Nia, which is just about 100 miles east of Khotan. And Nia was a site that was first excavated in around 1900 by Aurel Stein. He found a bunch of these wooden houses there. Some of the motifs on the wood are North Indian motifs. It's pretty clear that the people who settled in Nia came from North India. They wrote a script that was a North Indian script. There's some documents from Nia that are very interesting. They also had, this is some beautiful silks, and this is a Chinese silk. This is the silk I had in my slide about Roman coins for Chinese silks. One of the reasons we can be absolutely certain that this is a Chinese silk is that there are Chinese characters written in it. And I don't know how good all of you are with your, these characters. Some of them are, like that's z, like Hansen and z. May be hard to see. Here's the translation, if those of you who know Chinese. Whoop, sorry about this. So kings and lords should be married for thousands of autumns and tens of thousands of years. It's right that they bear sons and grandsons. This is like an auspicious wish for anybody, including the local king. So this is a gift, most likely from the Chinese emperor to the local rulers who are in Central Asia. But we also have, so that was found excavated at Nia. Everything at Nia dates to the 3rd and 4th centuries. So this is when I think there's the first time that there's contact between Rome and China. When I say contact, I don't necessarily mean somebody walked from Rome to Nia. I just mean that objects are coming from Rome objects are made in Nia, in Central Asia, in what's modern Xinjiang, and they have very accurate motifs that come from Rome or Central Asia. So this piece of cotton is interesting. This checkerboard pattern is Indian. It's probably made near Khotan. How is all of your Roman iconography? Will you give me that this is a lion's feet and a lion's tail? So this is Hercules, okay? And then this is just classic, this cornucopia motif. We can follow that. It's always associated with the Roman city gods, Troika, the city guardian. And so we can follow that motif. Oh, and I was going to say, this is really nice because it mixes Indian and Roman and then Chinese with this nice dragon here. So it's a very good example of the cultural mixing that takes place on the Silk Road. This is the only excavated example of silk, plain silk used as money that survives. It's in the British Museum, and it also dates to the 3rd and 4th centuries. And as I say here, that von Richthofen, he didn't understand. I mean, he knew. I mean, he imagined that there was a silk trade. He didn't know that the Chinese state was using silk as money, and so that's why there's so much silk found in Central Asia. And basically, so I'm casting aside his view and telling you that the new view of the Silk Road exchanges is that there were a lot of local exchanges, often for small transactions, and the Chinese military is stationed in Central Asia. That's part of the reason that there's silk up there, that the soldiers are paid in silk so they have something to spend at the market. But we have a lot of people moving around, so envoys and missionaries, artists, yes, some merchants, and they're carrying different cultures with them. And I think that's why the Silk Road is so exciting, is that cultural exchange. This is my last slide. This is when Aurel Stein found this. He found this, sorry, second to last slide, I'll just show you where this is from. It's from a little bit farther east of Khotan, a site called Nylan. And When Stein found this, there's 16 of these winged figures. He was so excited. It's just like, okay, I have found proof that the Europeans have made it to Central Asia, and you can see why. This is very clearly different than other things that people were finding in Central Asia. So he found those at Miran, which is right there. And I was going to say, so the period, and that's after 400. So I was going to say, when we were talking about what this talk should be called, some of my email proposal was the Silk Road during and after the Han Dynasty, because the Han Dynasty ends in 220 AD, and I think probably the first real discernible contacts between Rome and China are after 220. Thank you very much. I think we have Q&A. Have a sip of water, please. I've stunned you all. Yes?
The bolts of silk that we used for money, apparently they were not fancy silk or anything. So was it just a token used as money, or did it have some intrinsic value?
No, they have intrinsic value. And I was going to say, the government specifies that it should be plain silk. That's what the law code says. But when you look, we have examples of these tacked silks. I was part of a project working on these. Some of them are very elaborate and woven, but then the government has this whole system of saying, oh, it's not a piece of plain silk, it's got a motif on it, then the ratio of value is, it's 1.63 times a normal piece of silk. So people were using silk as money, and then they sometimes are giving somebody silk, and then the person will say, oh, I'm going to make some clothes out of this. So it had that function. But silk also, in some ways, it has advantages over coins. It was lighter. So, and it held its value. Silk was, I mean, you think about it, you think, like, it's not very practical to go around with these bolts of silk, but actually it seems to have worked okay. The Chinese had a chronic coin shortage. If they hadn't had a coin shortage, I don't think they would have gotten involved with silk as a currency, but they had a chronic coin shortage.
Basically, it was backed by the government.
It was backed by the government. Right, but it's funny, the government backs it, but only after people are already using it. You know, which is, I think, a common thing. If you're going to pick a currency, you want to pick something people already think is valuable. Right.
Why was there a coin shortage?
Mining, just like the lack of copper. So I mean, there are some periods where they can find more copper and some where they find less. But from the whole first millennium, they never have enough copper to make all the coins they want.
So why didn't they just use another method?
Well, let's go back in time and ask them. They tried. I mean, there were other things people tried, but nothing caught on. They just really felt like if it wasn't bronze, it wasn't money. It's interesting.
And wasn't kind of silly to bury billions of coins in the ocean?
Wasn't it kind of silly to build Versailles? I mean, these are not socialist societies, right? So, like, I mean, I don't think, I mean, from the point of view of the person buried there, this was a necessity, right? They had this whole city that he was going to live in as a dead after he died. It's like the terracotta warriors, too. If you have the money, this is a very good use of your money. I mean, if you have the money in this world, why not build yourself a splendid tomb for the next world? Because you're going to be there a long time. May as well have some fun.
The beliefs about the next world and so on, did any philosophies come through the Silk Road, you think? Or it was intrinsic to the region?
That's a good question. I mean, Buddhism comes in, right, on the Silk Road. That's the main thing. And it's funny, the Buddhists don't believe in lavish burials, right? They believe in cremation. So I think people are capable of having different kinds of beliefs at the same time. The other thing that may come in is Zoroastrianism from Iran, and this idea of the Day of Judgment, because there's some, I don't have a picture of it, but there's a tomb from the 500s in Xi'an that shows a family crossing a bridge that everyone thinks is the Day of Judgment bridge, and they get over the bridge safely. Underneath the bridge is a monster with its mouth gaping open. And they get over the bridge. So they're sufficiently virtuous that if you are not a virtuous person in Zoroastrianism, the bridge narrows so much that you tumble off the bridge. It becomes like a tightrope. You tumble into the mouths of that monster. So that, but I think most people would just say Buddhism, and the people the burials stop being as lavish as they are in the Han Dynasty, but they still continue to be more lavish than they should be according to Buddhist teachings. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your talk. Silk, how far back does it go in terms of its origin?
Well, depends on what you take as evidence of silk. So if you take a clay model of a silkworm, which some people will, then it goes back to like 4,500 BC. There's a site outside of Shanghai called Bumudu. If you want to see actual silk, then it goes back to about 3000 BC. There are some fragments of silk that have been found. What's interesting is they're not just in China. There's some evidence now of silk from India.
Yeah.
That's also about 2500 BC. So the dates are very early on this first silk.
I thank you very much for your talk. So why did they stop using silk? And what was the transition like?
Well, that's interesting. That's a great question. The northern nomadic peoples, so about the year 1000, they shift to coins. They start using iron coins. They find some more mines. They make more coins. But then, right around the year 1000, they discover paper money. Right? And that solves the whole issue of having a shortage of coins. They actually have they have such a surplus of coins that they can ship them to Japan. So, but the people, the northern, not the Mongols, but their predecessors, still like silk enough that they demand an indemnity paid in hundreds of thousands of bolts of silk every year. So it's still used as money in that one region, but otherwise people shift to paper money and coins.
The people who were living in that part of China,
In Khotan, or
yeah, Khotan, were they Uyghur people then?
not yet. They come in, there's Uyghur migrations around the 800s.
So were they Han? Who was the Uyghur?
Well, that's a huge and controversial issue. Not Chinese. That's for sure. And I say that, and anybody from the Chinese government would be horrified by my adamance. Right. So they're probably people of Iranian stock. That's what I think the best answer is.
If I remember correctly, in a former lecture, it was stated that Roman glass was found in the Han Dynasty tombs. So that would have been impossible, or it would have been a very, very roundabout route, or
No, I think probably, I think you could be right. I was going to say there's some early glass also found in Korea. So I could be wrong about the date. I think the people ahead of me know more about the Han than I do.
I was just so struck
Sure.
by that because I would never thought.
Right. So
Impossible.
it is, yeah, I think that there's I would say some isolated finds are possible. And I'm thinking about some things in Korea, but I don't think the things are in Korea from the Han Dynasty. I think they're like 4th or 5th century. So things are coming in. And I was going to say there's some Chinese silks that are found in Syria, even in the 1st century AD, where the same thing with characters in that. So, that's that whole question about how do we define contact? How much stuff do we need to see?
Right.
Does the silk get ruined in water and stuff like that before it's soaked? So how can you preserve the silk as a form of exchange when it's so perishable?
The question is not which is the best currency, right? Because there's a chronic shortage of coins. So it's we don't have enough coins to use coins, we have to use something else. What's our best alternative? I haven't read stuff about the silk. Silk you can wash silk. We don't do it very much, but you can just, people wash silk. It holds its value. And so there's not, it seemed to work okay. And the coins were heavy. That drove people crazy, how heavy, a string of coins, bronze coins. That was very heavy. Oh, it was definitely commercial. commercial society. Capitalism, that's a good, I mean, that's a classic question in Chinese history. I would say probably it's at 1100 or 1200 is where you start to see what we call a commercial revolution, and many people are involved with producing for the market. But if you think about modern China, if you look at a modern economy and say the government plays a huge role in it, the Han and the Tang dynasties, the government, I mean, there's a big economy and the government is playing a huge role in it. So that's a debate among, that has a lot to do with your definitions of capitalism. How are you going to define that? Absolutely.
Can you speak up so we can?
Oh, sorry. I'll repeat the question when yeah. Well, you're saying that, I was going to say there are three cultures that discover coins first. The Chinese and the Indians and the Greeks, and they're all around the same time. Does the discovery of coins, the use of early coins, reflect human nature? Not really, because there's lots of places where people don't discover. So, but and you could have some coins, but not have a very monetized economy, right? You could have like the king. I mean, there's a famous passage in Herodotus where Darius, the emperor of the Persian emperor of the Persian Empire, he collects his taxes. Herodotus tells us, and then he puts the coins in a clay bottle, and then he melts them. Because the state doesn't want coins. The state is perfectly happy to have a giant piece of silver. People want coins because they want to go buy stuff. Soldiers want coins. So that's interesting about who are the coins for. I know, but that's because that's the emperor. That's being a member of the royal family of just insane extravagance. I don't know that the Persians went to Khotan.
Oh, the Iranians, I'm sorry.
When I said the Iranians, this is like the 2000 BC, like Iranian tribes on the Iranian plateau. They're just following their herds. They're just like that. The Central Asia, there's like, who's there? It's not, I mean, Khotan, as you can see from my beautiful slides, it was not the most prosperous place in the world, right? It did have rivers. It did have, you couldn't irrigate. It wasn't bad. There were worse places. But Central Asia has low populations. But at that point, it's being populated by people from the Iranian plateau and not from China. That we know.
Do we know some people assume?
Oh, that's interesting. No, we think. I mean, we call it the kind of academic dodging the question is obfuscation. So we say Turco-Mongolic, meaning Turco-Mongolic means they probably spoke some kind of ancestor of Turkish or Mongolian, because those languages form a language family. There's like 3 words left in Xiongnu that we know anything about, and they're written down in the Chinese histories. And I've been at conferences where people will debate which language family they are. Those 3 words that are written down in Chinese. So no, I think the answer is they're some kind of nomadic people. I mean, even you could go, my guess would be like Siberia. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That might have been a Chinese craftsman. You know, when you see beautiful Scythian gold, they always say it's the Greek craftsman. And you have no way of knowing who made it, right?
Yeah. So how far does the Silk Road affect the influence of the empire?
I'm sorry. How far does this?
It's more like I feel like lots of the findings of those has mixed culture stuff. They're actually in Xinjiang province. Yeah. But it's quite a different kinds of culture compared with like the main capital area. So I wonder, can we interpret like the finding of the Xinjiang area as a major influence at that time for
China
were the kind of cup. like
I mean,
everywhere in China use. Can we do that or no?
There's a big foreign population in the 500s and 600s in central China, in the capital. These people, they're Iranians, they're called the Sogdians. And so that's, I mean, that, in a lot of ways, maybe that's what I should have done. I think that's when I would start, that's when I think is the height of the Silk Road exchanges between China and Iran.
In Han Dynasty.
No. The time, it's like the precursors to the Sui dynasty.
Okay.
So there's like the
actually
Zhou,
it's
Beijing.
moving closer and closer.
Yeah, and they're getting closer and closer to the Sui, and there's all this migration coming in from Central Asia,
Yeah,
from Samarkand.
Thank you.
I'm interested in those cut textiles in Nia. Were they made in that area, or were they brought from like India or someplace else?
I mean, you don't know, but the mix of the motifs, people think they're local. They do think that they were probably made locally. There's some other things where where the quality's higher, and people will say, oh, it's silk, and maybe it's come from India or like Central Asia. But the cotton, people think is probably local.
The custom of burning
Yeah.
that perhaps maybe the information will go out to fire.
I don't think so. And if you were going to ask me when is the earliest burning, I don't know. I'm very interested in that, but there's paper things are put in tombs, and models are put in tombs from very early on. And of course, there won't be archaeological evidence of the things that were burnt, right? We'll just have the ashes. So,
Was there offering to the ancestors when the tombs were built like they were at the
yeah, the offerings to the ancestors go way back.
How is it that the thieves got into the tomb before the government did?
Well, one time I was driving around with our archaeologists around Xi'an, I was going to say the capital of the Han and the Tang, and there are all these mounds, and he said, we're driving around, and he's going, oh, that's a Han tomb, that's a Tang tomb, that's between the interregnum period. Those tomb robbers all knew that. So when you say the government was not, somebody was telling me that one of the explanations for the jade not being taken from that tomb was that the government had a ban on that. I mean, I just don't believe that. The government just didn't have that much control. So, you think about even now, they can't control tomb robbing, right? I mean, it's not just the Chinese. Nowhere in the world can anybody control tomb robbing. It's because the forces of evil. I shouldn't say it's not the forces of evil, that's not right. Because it's often poor people. That they're just local people that can make a buck by opening up a tomb and selling something. And it's just so hard to prevent people from doing that.
In your opinion, who established the Silk Road? Who was the first? Who pioneered?
I like the old, going way back. I even go back before 1200 BC. Because when you say Silk Road, what I hear in my head is overland Central Asian trade. And, if people could walk, they were trading stuff. So, and they could walk, I would go back like, 20,000 BC, why not?
I forget the gentleman from Italy who visited China back around what, 1300?
Marco Polo?
Yes.
Yes. You may be the only person in the world who, are you teasing?
Did he use the Silk Road to get there, or did he marry?
He says, no. Oh, it's funny, he goes home by the maritime route. He tells us, right, he tells us that he he's traveling with someone who, a Chinese princess is married, is to be married to an Iranian, and so he goes he takes the maritime route home. But going, he tells us he's on the Silk Road.
Did he plan to go to China, or just traveling and hit upon?
We don't know. It's a good question, we just don't have that information.
How does the early Silk Road affect the later, like maritime, kinds of expansion, like in England?
Well, the maritime Silk Road starts early. People probably figure out the monsoons around 400. So 400 AD. I feel like the overland Silk Road trade is just different than the maritime. Because the constraint on the overland trade is you have animals and you have people carrying things. So nothing can be, you can't carry that much stuff. And that's why like jewels or glass or small things are the things that move overland. The maritime, you can put so much stuff on a ship. So when there are a couple of Silk Road excavated shipwrecks, they have so much stuff. I mean, tons of stuff. Well, I'm trying to think of, like, coins, I don't know how much 1,760,000 coins weighs, but I do know there's a ship from 13th century found in Korea where they had 29 tons of coins. So it's just a whole different realm. Contact is there between China and India? Basically it is linked to the Silk Road too, and I would say it's with Buddhism coming in. So it'll be 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries. It's closer. Yeah, it's closer. It's more frequent than Rome, sure. Sure, no question.
My understanding is that silk and jade, in general, came from that area and not from China. That's all from.
I think the jade is from Khotan. The jade is. I just think we all say that there is a possibility that there were mines in the past that don't exist now and we don't know about them. But in Khotan, they weren't mining the jade. It was all boulders. They found it was riverine boulders. The silk, those early sites I was telling you about, that's all on the coast. That's central China. Nobody thinks silk comes from Central Asia.
Okay.
It's Shanghai, modern Shanghai.
Okay.
Absolutely. He's referring to Khotan, which of course was not part of China at that time,
Okay, that's
right? But in terms of the modern Chinese view, which is that the borders of the People's Republic of China go back in eternity on the map, that is the view. I mean, that is the government's point of view. So Khotan is part of China. There's some kings. There are Khotanese kings. They had their own language. Before the Uyghurs come in, the Khotanese, that's part of why we think, I mean, there's the Khotanese spoke a language, they spoke a language with, let me have to think about this for a second. It's a Sanskritic language with a lot of Iranian vocabulary.
So are they
No, totally different. The Khitan, they sound the same. The Khitan are in, pointing up this way, in the northeast. And in Mongolia. Inner Mongolia is where the Khitan are. The Khitan are after, a little, the Khitan get going, oh well, it's so complicated. They actually are around in the Tang Dynasty, but they get powerful after like 900. Am I saying? Oh no, that's just no. I'm not saying that. I think that they're probably. I'm trying to stay as vague as possible. People from the Iranian plateau, and actually, those people from the Iranian plateau go into India also. Right. So okay. So that it's just if you think of Eurasia and different blobs of population. There is a center in Iran, and the people from the Iranian plateau settle a lot of Central Asia, and they go into the Indian subcontinent, but they don't go into China. That in terms of migration patterns. Some mountains, and also I think there were people in China already. I'm sorry, this is getting like far from things I know about, but like I can just tell you that when people see a break, they see that those people settling in modern Xinjiang. Maybe that's debatable. But certainly in India, but not in China.
So I just want to remind you that many of the questions that you're asking Professor Hansen on the Silk Road is an excellent discussion of language and geography.
I pay people like him to come to the talk. It's actually, he's a representative of Oxford University Press. They try to plant people like this. I think we should stop. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.